So here with Audie Attar, Conor McGregor's manager, leader of Paradigm, which has dozens of clients, big time athletes. You guys have been doing MMA, you guys have been doing movies and TV, there's other athletes in other sports. So take me behind the curtain a little bit. What would you say is like your biggest skill as an agent?
First of all, it's a pleasure to speak with you. So thanks for having me on. When I founded Paradigm, the idea was to be best in class from a management perspective and in high growth sports. I come from a football background, so I started my career really as an NFL agent. And so when I launched Paradigm, I really wanted to build a platform. I wanted to focus on high growth sports, and in focusing initially on the most underserved sport, which is mixed martial arts. And I'm a huge fan of the sport, and I saw a huge opportunity in where the sport was going, and really an underserved market that in the fighters that had so much potential, not only from the growth of the sport and the growth of the UFC, which is the catalyst of the sport really, and still the premier promotion, but they also had an ability to shine bright as a brand, as individuals, right? And so we wanted to build a platform that not only served those athletes and their interest, at the highest level. But then we wanted to build media and content, obviously initially unscripted and the short form from a digital perspective. But then there's also long form and scripted. And so, the vision didn't stop there. It also wanted to disrupt sectors and industries that we felt we could align with our athletes or ecosystem as athletes, the athlete's voice grew and their ability to reach consumers directly change with obviously the growth of social media and the internet. That was the vision, and it was I think what separates me is really, I think, like an entrepreneur. I don't consider myself just an agent or just a manager per se, but I really approach not only the broader business goals that way, but I even approach my representation of an athlete that way. And so whether it's a contract negotiation or even career management, I try to think of it as an entrepreneur, but really their advisor in building them into be an entrepreneur. And so I think that's kind of always been my mindset. That's always been my approach. And based on what we've been able to achieve, I think it shows that's paid dividends.
Totally. You talked about like a negotiation between fighters. It could be through whoever. Can you walk me through like what a typical negotiation would look like between that you yourself, an athlete, a promoter, whoever?
I mean, they're all different. I mean, I think in short, to answer your question, there isn't one negotiation that's exactly the same as another, but certainly there's similarities and parallels, right? You have to understand what your client's wants are, what your client's needs are, what the client value is. You also have to understand the other side, and in mixed martial arts is much different than soccer or football or any other stick and ball sport for that matter, because in those sports, you have either collective bargaining, you have visibility, an allocated amount of revenues that are dedicated to salary pools or salary, and then maybe a salary cap. And mixed martial arts is not that way. It's not only does it continue to be the fastest growing sport in the world from a professional perspective, but it's still early days, right? I would say that it's the fighters are independent contractors, not employees, and so you're then having to negotiate based on the limited information that you have. But that also then requires you to have the right relationships and also get to understand the other side's wants, needs, concerns, and try to approach it really with as much information as you have, but also do a good job of listening and articulating, not just demanding, right? And so I think usually that allows you to get to the best result. And it takes time, so it's never linear, but you surely have to put in the right amount of work to achieve your goal.
Like when you're building a fight, right? Like I would assume that that's part of negotiation too, right? Is like building a fight, types of opponents, and then maybe like if you're negotiating a new deal, if you don't have any fights left in your deal or whatever, they want to assign you to a new one. Um, you know, do you like give like a list of opponents? Like for Conor, it's a little bit different, but I guess for like a different client or whomever, would you throw like was it collaborative where like you meet up with the UFC and like here's five opponents that we would like, and then UFC comes at you with one and they pick the one. And then like same thing with like with money too, like, hey, like I think he deserves a bump from where he's currently at. Like, do you guys say that or does UFC come at you with that? Because I know the UFC gives a lot of bonuses as well. That's a big part of their structure. So I just wanted to like behind the curtain on like the building the fight, and then also the structure of the contract as well.
Yeah, I think it's case by case, but I think the difference again, and if I were to just give comparisons in the fight world, fights sometimes don't happen until let's call it 8 to 12 weeks ahead of the event. So it's not like there's a schedule of fights that the fighter is already predetermined to participate in for that year. Unlike, a season in a stick and ball sport where you know what the season looks like, your preseason games, your regular season games and dates, and the playoffs and championship dates as well, even if that hasn't yet necessarily been determined due to play. In the fight world, it's a shorter runway. So fights happen and come together in different ways. The UFC does have a schedule of events. They do have cards and they have weekly matchmaker meetings that they're involved with, and they try to slot. Okay, well, who's best placed for this card for a variety of different reasons. Whether it's who is it a pay-per-view card? Is it a fight night card? That determines if the main event or co-main event are title fights or non-title fights, or a McGregor fight, if you will. And then the rest of the card kind of shapes out the same way. It's like the best of the best, but looking at certain, let's call it qualifying points that are important to the promotion, whether it's a fight in Vegas versus a fight in Abu Dhabi, right? And if it's a pay-per-view or non-pay-per-view, and then they look at things that way. And then the fighters, because they're independent contractors, they don't have to say yes to a fight, right? It could be injury, it could be conflict, it could be whatever reason. And the fight, and then they have to continue to go down their list. The way we try to approach it is, and there's still a big difference between a Conor McGregor fight or one of our younger fighters, if you will, or a fighter that's maybe not a top 10, top 15 ranked fighter, but we still try to provide a few names for consideration. Hey, what about these names, right? Being proactive with it. And sometimes they're coming to us, but oftentimes good managers are also trying to keep their fighters active. So you're constantly staying in communication, and you say, hey, they're available this date, this date, this date. What do you have in mind? And that may put them top of mind for them to be discussed in their own internal meetings to then determine, okay, that's a good matchup. Let's make that matchup. Let's not make that matchup. In the case of Conor, he's on a whole nother level, right? And so it really is about what makes sense. And for him, it's what's going to get him out of bed to keep doing it. He doesn't have to fight another day in his life, and he chooses to want to continue to pursue greatness and competition and something that he loves dearly. And so I think for him, it's happened in so many different ways. It could be banter that then starts, online. That banter kind of takes a life of its own, shows certain, consumer interest, right, in that matchup. And then that, allows us to then have the conversation and say, hey, look, let's make this fight. This is good business, right? And it excites Conor to go in there and compete and be his best, right? And so it just varies. It's not in it's such a fast-paced environment that you have to be fluid, agile, but proactive and reactive at the same time. And so, I think that makes it exciting, and it makes every day a different day.
Totally. You said the banter thing. Had to bring it up. Sean O'Malley is off the Connor train after most recent some tweet or whatever. One of my buddies was saying, he was like, they should fight. Like they're both strikers, like that makes sense. And I was like, 135 versus 155 makes no sense. Sean is listed at 5'10. I don't know if he's actually 5'10, but he's listed at 5'10. Could you ever see that happening if you put on a ton of weight?
O'Malley's definitely a tall fighter, and
Yeah.
he's a great young talent. Look, you never say never. I mean, I think there's such a long list of potential opponents for Conor to entertain that it's just about what gets him excited, what matchup gets him excited. I mean, I think every fighter wants to fight Conor McGregor, whether they're a heavyweight or whether they're a featherweight. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
And for different reasons, but I think ultimately it's for competition and it's also for compensation because I think everybody understands when they fight Conor, there's going to be a significant, bump in what they normally get paid, right? And so, at the end of the day, it's not top of mind, so I couldn't tell you definitively either way.
No, totally. Yeah, just I mean, I know he's in training camp right now. Do you know what Connor's training regiment's looking like these days?
Yeah, I'm actually in Dublin right now. I've been
Okay.
here for a couple days, and then I'm going to be coming back out here in a couple weeks. And um, you know, obviously there's a lot of business that continues to go on, not only with all of our existing businesses, but then a lot of new businesses. And but he's locked in. So me coming out here is really meeting with our team and kind of going through all the necessary business that we have to cover and really trying to help him continue to focus because he's totally zeroed in on June 29th. And I think that that's exciting. And obviously it's like it's getting closer and closer. And so it's about him just continuing to do what he does and continuing to push himself because he knows what it takes. He's this is not new to him. And so ultimately, though, with a long layoff, you got to make sure that you're fully focused and singularly focused on the task at hand. So we're trying to do our best as a team to, take away a lot of the burden from a business perspective. And but he's still, a founder, he's still a chairman, he's still involved. And so, there are still some things that he needs to have visibility. And I think that he's every time we go through a different phase of our career, I see a new him, and that's encouraging, and that has to continue, right?
Let's talk about the biggest fight ever that you created. Give me the behind the scenes on Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor, the craziest fight ever. It was supposed to never happen, and you made it happen. So I just want to give me that.
Well, I appreciate the recognition. I certainly didn't make it happen on my own.
Yeah.
It definitely took a village, if you will. And it really started with Conor. Conor's vision to always want to fight him, Floyd, that is.
Mhm.
Conor putting it out there on social media, and to my earlier point, the banter that then took place. And early days, the UFC was not on board, right? Publicly saying they're not on board.
Ooh.
And I think one of the things again that we always try to do is, despite kind of what goes on behind the scenes, we've always been and always been about doing good business. We prided ourselves to doing good business, but getting there anyway, we have to get there, right? And so ultimately, I think because of the banter that Connor started, Floyd engaged, and that started to pick up. What you also then had is data to show that there's serious consumer interest into something like this that hadn't been done before.
Right.
And so at the time, it was a fun journey. It was definitely not linear. But once I think, credit to the UFC, they saw the value. And at the end of the day, they came to the table and they became our partners and we made history together. And I'm very proud of that. I think everybody doubted us, everybody said it couldn't happen. And ultimately we pulled it off.
Totally. So, take me back. 2016. I'm still in college, and I am fully on. I'm team Conor McGregor. I literally had Conor McGregor drawn by an artist for my graduation cap on my for graduation day. Conor fights Floyd Mayweather that August. Prior to that, the Paulie Malignaggi stuff happens, and this is how I find out for the first time. I hear who Audie Attar is. This is the first time I heard your name. Walk me through the Paulie Malignaggi situation. He comes up to you, he starts yelling at Conor. You walk up to him, and you say, you talked out of your contract, Paulie, something like that.
We were talking out of your contract, Paulie.
Walk me through that from your perspective.
Yeah, no, look, Paulie was a great boxer. He had a great career, and we knew we wanted to give Conor the best look possible. And going back, that was a time when Conor wasn't even doing road work from a running perspective for his knee, right?
Mhm.
And to think that he went through a 10-week camp for Floyd Mayweather, having not done one run from a road work perspective is phenomenal. But one of the things that again we wanted is to get that look, particularly from a sparring partner, right? At a high level from a boxing perspective. And I think it was Paulie that initiated the interest in wanting to join camp and wanting to be a sparring partner and wanting to help out. We took it as genuine. We didn't take it as, well, he does commentating and he's probably trying to do this and maybe he's trying to angle for a fight. And we really took it as genuine, and there's always the risk that you could bring a sparring partner in similar weight class and you may end up fighting them. So there's always that risk. And that's not something we were, necessarily oblivious to, but we didn't see it as a risk, nor potentially something we would consider, right, in terms of where we were going from a trajectory perspective. And so he comes into camp. I think and we were still younger in our career. He may have been expecting different, a different greeting, different, setup, if you will. But signs the contract. They have a sparring session. It was a great sparring session. Conor looked good in the sparring session, and everybody knows when you're promoting your own fight, you're going to be posting training pictures. You're going to be, especially this was a crossover event. Can he box? How, there's no way he could even last a round. And there's no, you know what I mean? Like all these things. And so naturally Conor was just promoting his fight, his camp, right? And so he posted a sparring session, and I believe, there was a knockdown. Now Paulie claims that he tripped, um, and I think Paulie had an issue with it being posted for his own reasons, right? And so um, that then turned into him quitting, leaving the camp, and we were, I think reunited, if you will,
Yep.
during one of our Maymac press obligations in Las Vegas, and I think it was outside T-Mobile, if I'm not mistaken, and something happened between them two. And then I was trying to diffuse the situation, but also calling it for what it was. Like, he went out and started doing media tours and interviews, and which it was a breach of his contract. And that's the whole point I was trying to make to him, is like, yo, not, we did nothing wrong here, right? It's like, if you didn't like it and you left, all good, but you talked out of your contract. So that's what I was trying to say to him, and at the same time just trying to diffuse it, because I actually got along with Paulie and I didn't ever have an issue up until that point.
Mhm.
And still I tried to, as I always try to do, I try to handle it respectfully, and but things were getting heated between the two, and then you had this mob around us and cameras everywhere, and so it ended up being what it was. And ultimately I think from there he was even trying to campaign for a fight, and it just what was, I think, an unfortunate situation, but these things happen.
No, totally. So why didn't they end up fighting? Because I felt like that was next, right? I felt like there was a good shot to box him right after that. We had the video. I don't know. Why not?
I just look, I think that Conor had other plans, particularly obviously as it relates to his fights, and Paulie just didn't slot in, right, as being the best potential opportunity for us next, right? So I know that there's a lot of people that, like yourself, that probably were under like, well, that's great, sets it up, and
Yeah.
but then you look at who else is in line. It kind of goes back to my point on your earlier question on, if you'd fight another fighter. It's like there's so many names. Everybody wants to fight him for their own reasons, right? So ultimately, it's like Conor gets to pick who he wants to fight. That's the
Right.
reality of the situation. And love him or hate him, you got to deal with the facts, right? And so ultimately, I think that's what it came down to.
No, totally. And so I only got a couple left here for you. BKFC, how did that come about?
So BKFC has been talking to us for some time. I got to meet Dave Feldman right before I think he was about to launch it. And really, credit to him for what he's built over the years. Where people thought it was going to be a, flash in the pan and it wasn't going to last. And he's done a really good job, and he's working him and his team tirelessly to continue to build that brand and that format of combat sports. And it is unique and it is different, but it is something that's familiar as well. And so, I think it took some time. It took some time, and it was reapproached, and our team in Ireland leaned into the process, and all of us kind of huddled up together, and ultimately Conor felt that it was something that he wanted to do. He was a fan of actually the BKFC format, and he had attended an event we had sponsored, one of our brands or a couple of our brands. I don't remember at the time, but we had sponsored an event. Then he was also interested in going to watch. I don't know if this was the one that he made, but I know he had an interest of watching Chad Mendes and Eddie Alvarez. He always he tries to support the sport. He tries to support fighters. I know he then ended up ultimately going to an event, and he was blown away by it. He loved the energy. He got, I think, in the cage and faced off with Mike Perry, I believe, at the time as well. So I think it just comes down to Connor wanting to do it. And he believed in something, and felt that this was, not only something that he was passionate about, but it made business sense.
Is there any role that he has with the company? Like, is he going to be promoting it, or is it merely just he's an investor or a partner in it?
Well, he's definitely a shareholder, but he's also an ambassador. So he wants to support it. I don't necessarily think you could label him as the promoter. I think that's Dave Feldman's job. But certainly, he's getting behind it, and he's activate even before the deal, activating his brand's there too, right? So ultimately, I think you'll see him supporting, and oftentimes you'll see him doing it because he's passionate about it, right? And I think that's important, right? To get involved in something like this.
Did Dana and the UFC have any thoughts on it? Did you tell them before it was announced or anything like that?
I think we just always keep good communications with the UFC, but there was no objections.
No objections. Okay. And when it comes to the promotion, like they're a little bit different, right? They're just doing bare knuckle boxing. Could there be any could he ever fight for them at any point? I know his contract's up.
No, no, the deal's not doesn't call for any of that. It has nothing to do with him fighting at all for them.
Okay.
In terms of like the future and what combat sports he competes in, I think right now he's focused obviously on his UFC return. That's the main focus, right? But there's always going to be those boxing opportunities, which he's always publicly stated that he wants another crack at that. And so, we were working on some stuff that didn't materialize kind of over that COVID period. And that, for those that are, in the know, or if you watch McGregor Forever on Netflix, you'll get more of the story. But I think that's certainly in the cards for sure.
Mhm. Switching gears off of Connor, Michael Venom Page interviewed him before his UFC debut. Looked amazing against Kevin Holland. Was there live. Frustrated the hell out of Kevin Holland. Super impressive debut. Are we looking at him jumping up to a contender? Could he fight? There's rumors of Ian Gary. What do you see next for MVP?
I think we'll have some pretty cool announcements that are coming up, including Michael Venom Page's next fight.
Okay.
I think you're going to see a better Michael Venom Page. I think when you talk to Michael, he wasn't satisfied with his performance. I think if you watched his post fight press conference, he's very articulate. He's very intelligent. He has a high fight IQ, even though his style is very unique, right? And so he really breaks down his own performance and is very critical on it. But I agree. I thought he looked great. That he frustrated the hell out of Kevin Holland. It's like Kevin
Impressive.
Holland had no answers for him, and he dominated the fight from start to finish. And so I think but what's exciting for me is to see that there's still that growth in his ability, and he has the desire to continue to show that ability at a higher level. So I do think that you will see him against. I definitely think it'll be, at that contender level. I think it's going to be an exciting matchup. I think it's going to be an opportunity for him to go out there and prove what he could do, right? And he's such a great human being. One of my favorite people, honestly, to work with, just in terms of how respectful he is, how considerate he is, and he's very talented, not just as an athlete, but he's such a creative mind, and it's really exciting some of the stuff that we're working on with him, um, in terms of just bringing that creativity to light in a very major way. And so I'm excited for what the future holds for MVP, and honored to be on his team.
Hell yeah. I know you have Connor and Bisping jumping into the acting world. Do you have any exciting announcements on Paige being an actor? Because
Well, there will, that's definitely in the cards for sure. And again, that's, without going into detail, that's some of the things that we're definitely working on and developing on as it relates to him. And yeah, I mean, look, he'll join Connor and Bisbing in that ranks, and Rico Verhoeven, who's also now, the glory, heavyweight world champion, who's been a champion for over a decade. He's arguably the greatest kickboxer of all time, but he's also not only a giant of a man, but he's so articulate, he's so charismatic. His acting has been picking up as well, and there's some more down the pipeline. So it's all about the clients and what they want to do, and if they want to participate in in acting or in any other endeavor outside of their specific sport. It's just about making sure you do it the right way, and it aligns organically with them. If someone is camera shy, well, and they say they want to act, well, okay, well then you got to work on that craft, right? Because if you want to do this, you have to do that, right? It takes what it takes, and whatever it is you're trying to do.
no, totally. So we have Chandler in a month, and then he said that he wanted to fight maybe two or three more times this year. McGregor did. Were there, why? Because when at UFC 299, when at the post fight, when we were talking to Dana White about it, he shot down Nate Diaz at the Sphere so hard. Do you think that's more of a Nate thing than it is a Connor thing?
Yes,
Okay.
certainly. I mean, Nate's not part of the promotion anymore, right? So I don't think it has anything to do with Connor. I think if Nate was still on the roster, then that is certainly a great matchup to do on Mexican Independence weekend
Yep.
at the Sphere. I mean, it'd be massive, right? But I think it's more of a Nate thing. Yeah.
Mm. Could we see him fight on the Sphere anyway? I don't know what the problem is. I don't know any Mexican fighters that could potentially fight at the Sphere. I would throw a name at Jorge Masvidal. I think he has a good fan base over there, but I don't think he's Mexican.
Listen, you can't rule out Nate. I mean, it's about Nate getting a deal done with the UFC,
Mhm.
but that fight will happen. I hope it happens at the Sphere this September,
Right.
but it's going to happen. I think the fans want to see that, that trilogy, right? And so ultimately, it's just about when, where, how. I think
Mhm.
that those are the things that you have to work through to make that become a reality, right?
Yep. Connor's the slight betting favorite against Chandler. He'll definitely be the betting favorite if he fights Nate. Say he goes 2-0, imaginary world. Islam?
Ultimately, I think you certainly are going to see a very ambitious and competitive Connor that wants to compete at the highest levels. He's not just doing this just to take fights because he needs money, which everybody knows is not the case, right? And so at the end of the day, I think it's just about him going out and focusing on one fight at a time, right? And he has to focus on Michael Chandler, singular focus, make sure he goes out there and does what he needs to do, and then you can focus on what's next.
Totally. Would you say that the leg is an advantage since there's like whatever the steel rod in it or whatever is in it, the titanium? Do you think that's an advantage?
I I don't know, but from what I hear, it's stronger than it ever was, right? And so ultimately, the way it's faring now, it's looking great. But is it an advantage? I mean, I don't know. It's not like he's RoboCop coming out there
Yeah.
with an armor suit, right? But ultimately, I think it's just about making sure that he was fully healthy. I mean, that was a very gruesome injury, right? There was a point in that recovery process where there was a lot of doubt and what ifs, and it's a tough thing to come back from. And so credit to him for pushing through and wanting to come back and compete, even with not only our businesses doing well, but then now entertainment is a big piece, and that is taking a life of its own. And so ultimately, I think for someone that chases greatness like Connor does, you got to give him credit. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, June 29th, he has to go out there and prove it. That's what it comes down to.
That's exactly right. You know, I would like to see him return to the kick heavy approach because that if you watch the Holloway fight, which I did like the other day, kick heavy, spinning back kicks, like that was like his thing. Do you think that that happens a little bit more of?
I mean, I couldn't. First of all, I wouldn't divulge anything I know in terms of his game plan, but I think that that's something that him and John Kavanaugh and the coaches, Owen Roddy, that they're putting together the right game plan. And but he's right now, as I can tell you, just being here and spending time with him, he's truly deep in his martial arts bag, if you will.
Oh, that's so exciting. Is it like what? Like, can you put me in behind the scenes of like what his training regimen looks like on a random day?
I mean, it's been the same that most of these fighters go through. You're going double sessions, you're going, in between sessions, you got your recovery and working on your body and then, he still has meetings and obligations that he has to do with his respective staff and businesses.
Mhm.
So it's busy. It's a busy schedule for him right now. And, at the end of the day that, they have the cadence of when rest days are, and recovery is a big part of it as well. And sometimes he's in this current mode where you have to get him to rest because he's also so excited about the process and he's really enjoying the process. But recovery is important, right? And so it's like making sure that you're not going too hard, even if even if you feel you should. Like his energy is so high right now, you have to make sure that he's also thinking of recovery as part of that process.
Is it, can I, and this we can wrap on this. Can I compare him to, so like LeBron James is 41, 42, or no, just turned 40. Brady played till he was 45. And the way that I'm looking at it is they have so much money that they have so much resources at their disposal that they can like the longevity of their careers is going to be longer because they've done better financially than others. What would you say about that? Like, Connor's got more money than all of them, all of the fighters. In theory, is it more of a long? Does he have more chance at longevity? Like you see that he's like he's I forget how old he is. I think he's 35. Um, he's a little, he's not in his prime, but his prime's probably extended because he has a little bit more money.
Well, what I would also tell you is MMA is a lot different than those stick and ball sports, right? I think when you look at a fighter and the age, it's like usually the fighters hitting their prime in their 30s in terms of the fight IQ, and so
Mhm.
long as they're doing what it takes to be ready at that highest level. And so what I would say on that point is that if Connor continues to invest in himself from an athletic perspective, then he gives himself the best chance to compete for as long as he wants, right? Ultimately, I think you see it. You saw LeBron, you saw Kobe, you saw Jordan, you see Tiger Woods, you see a lot of great, phenomenal, legendary athletes in their respective sport. And they all go through, there's this sharp rise and then something happens. The body's kind of like, talking back to them because they've been doing it since they were young. I think MMA, they're not in AAU, they're not in, playing high school or college, sports, if you will, in mixed martial arts. So it's just a little bit of a different kind of a feeder program and I think timeline in terms of when a fighter peaks, if you will, right? Father time is real though for all sports, right? And that's a reality. And so it's about how much he invests in himself and his body and his training and all the associated things as it relates to all that. That is important for him if he wants to continue to compete, right? In combat sports. And I think based on what I'm seeing now, he's taking the right steps. And so it's just about continuing to do that.
Yeah, I hope he does. I hope he does. And obviously, you've been an awesome manager to him because you've been, helping take care of his business side for how long? You've been doing it forever. I forgot to ask this from the beginning and I had it in my notes. How did you guys meet?
We were introduced by someone that was a fan of his, and that has the same last name as another McGregor, but diaspora McGregor, so it wasn't in Ireland, and put me on to he said, look, this kid at Cage Warriors, you got to check out, and so obviously I checked them out, and then we ended up connecting on initially it was Facebook. This is geez, I think it was like 2012, 2013, something like back then. Um, his debut, I think, was what, 2012,
Yeah. For the
right?
UFC, yeah, I believe so. Yeah, right around then.
2000. So it was back then. So we met on Facebook. That was the premium platform back then.
Yeah.
And our first meeting was, we're using Zoom right now, but back then it was Skype, and so we met on Skype. And that was our first chat, and then followed up with another chat with him and Kavanaugh, and then the story that is history now, right? I think it's been an amazing journey. Long may it continue, and we're excited because we're now leveling up, now trying to take everything we do, from a athletic and business and perspective to the next level.